welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sebbing, and today I'm going to teach you how to make block 6 in the Dimensions block of the month. This one uses a blue Kinkame shades. It goes from really deep blue to more of a sky ocean blue. I'm really excited about it because we get all this color variation from one strip of fabric. It's so cool. So block 6 is really similar to block 5, but the orientation of the way the pieces face is a little bit different, and they're kind of oriented in opposing positions on the corners, so they really balance each other out really well, but the techniques are really similar. So let's get started. So we're going to start with our flying geese, just like we've been starting all along. So we want to arrange a little square on the side of one of these rectangles so that the edges are all even. And I've already pre-drawn these lines from corner to corner on the wrong side of the gray square, so that way we have a line to sew with. Now I want to change my sewing machine needle so that way it is in the center, and I'm going to sew just to the right of this drawn line, so that way when we flip that over and press it, it'll be perfectly accurate. Now I'm going to repeat that step with all the others. So I'm lining up the 1/4 inch line on my ruler with that seam that we just sewed. That way I can trim off a 1/4 inch seam, and then I have a really accurate and even size triangle that I can use to make a fun improvisational piece, throw pillow at the end. Now I need to press these so that way the little wing of the flying geese is going out. And if you've done this right, you should still have a nice rectangle that measures the exact measurements of your original rectangle. Now we need to take our remaining squares and we need to sew them to get our other wing. This time the line that we drew should be going from the bottom left to the middle. Top middle. We've done this a lot if you've been following along with the Dimensions block of the month, but I'll give you a refresher one more time on how to make sure that we don't lose any of these points when we're sewing our flying geese together. So you can see really well in this piece that the threads make an X when they come together. So what you want to do when you're sewing is sew right down so that your needle is just one needle width to the right of where those threads come together, and that'll make sure that you have your point intact every single time when you sew your flying geese together. So I'm going to go ahead and flip these together and start sewing. I also need to change my sewing machine back to a 1/4 inch stitch because now we've officially gotten into the quilting part of it where we need that 1/4 inch stitch to have our math turn out right. I always line my corners up rather than pin, but if you like to pin, then go ahead and pin this sucker up. That's fine too. Alright, so I sew about 1/4 of the way down, and then I line my back corners up, and then I go kind of slow as I approach that middle, so I can make sure that I'm one needle width to the right of where the thread X is. And then if I need to, I jog back over so that I'm back with my regular 1/4 inch stitch. I'd rather be a little skinny and have a little bit of a wave where that point comes in so we can see it and it's not chopped off at all, because you're never going to notice that, but you're definitely going to notice it if you cut off your point. Press these open now and check out our points. That is a really good joint. I'm really happy with the way that that turned out. You got a perfect point there. All right, we can set these aside and start with the next step. So in order to get it so that our gradated color change goes from dark to light at the top, we have to cut rectangles first, and then we're gonna cut them into triangles. I'm gonna show you how to do that next. Make sure you save your cast-offs because we're gonna create an improvisational piece throw pillow at the very end. So when I trim this, I need to trim it into a triangle. So I have my 45-degree line on my ruler lined up with the bottom edge of this fabric, and the bottom being the darker side. I'm going to go ahead and just cut off that corner along that 45-degree angle that's created here between the 45-degree line and the edge of your ruler. Then I'm going to go ahead and turn it, that 45-degree line up with it, and then I have the tip of my ruler lined up with the edge, the very corner of that rectangle. Go ahead and cut that off, and again, save these because we're going to create something special with it at the end. Now I've got to do it for the rest of these pieces, and then we're ready to sew. While I'm cutting, I'm also going to cut this square in half along the diagonal to form the solid end of our unit. So we're about to be sewing on the bias, and the bias can be a scary word, but it doesn't have to be. It just means that it's a little bit stretchier on this end of the fabric than it would be on this end. So we just have to take a little bit extra care. You don't want to pull, tug, or any way force your fabric through your feed dogs. You just want to let them do their job and pull the fabric through on their own. I also want to set my sewing machine to a scant 1/4 inch stitch. All that means is I already have my sewing machine set at a 1/4 inch. I'm gonna press my settings so that my needle moves 1 needle width to the right. That gives me a little bit skinnier seam and makes it easier to be able to trim stuff off rather than not have enough and my piece be too small. All right, so I'm gonna flip these guys right sides together, and I'm just gonna sew right down the joining seam here. Triangles like this, I like to press them open. To do that, I just use my fingertip to open up that seam, and then I put the very tip of my iron and run it back and forth on there from the back side first, and then from the front side. Now when you're doing this, your seam should be very flat on the back. There shouldn't be any wobbly bits. If there are, then it means you have a pleat on the front that you'd be able to see visibly. It won't look like a straight line like this one. So you'll want to pay attention to that and make sure that doesn't happen. This really makes for a nice flat seam. Now we just need to sew the 2 halves of our triangles together. We're going to flip them right sides together, and it's important to note that the gray triangle is going to be just a little bit bigger than your blue triangles that are sewn together. I did that on purpose. I did it so that you would have a little bit to trim off and you wouldn't have to worry about something being too small. So just make sure that your blue triangle is centered nicely over your gray triangle and everything will work out just fine. So I'm still using my scant 1/4 inch seam here, and it's important to note that we're still sewing on the bias, so you really want to make sure that you are just letting your feed dogs do the work. I'm not pushing, pulling, I just have my fingertip on the very bottom corner of these to kind of keep those together. I'm letting the machine pull it through, and that's really, really important when you're sewing on the bias because you do not want to stretch that as you're sewing or your block isn't going to lay flat. All right, it's time to trim these babies up. I'm going to show you a little bit different way to trim on these. You can trim this way, or you can trim the way we showed you for block 5. Both of them will get the same result. It's just whichever one you prefer. So for this time, instead of putting my 45-degree line along the seam line where the 1/4 square triangle is joined, I'm going to put it along the half square triangle. This is it'll get you the same result, it's just a different way of doing things. So I want to make sure that I've got my 45-degree line going along there, and I still want to make sure in this case that my 4.5 dotted line and the top of the ruler are meeting where this seam comes together. So I want that to be right at the same spot. And so I'm just checking out those 2 points, and if they work, then we're going to go ahead and trim that off. Again, we didn't have too much of the blue that came off, but we did have a little bit of that gray. That's good. I'd rather have too much than not enough. All right, now we're going to flip that around. The end that we just cut is going to be in line exactly with the 4.5 inch mark here. I still have where these seams come together is even with where the 4.5 inch dotted line meets the edge of the ruler. And then we still have our 45-degree line going across that. So we're going to give this a little trim. And we're not taking too much of that blue off, but we definitely got a little bit of the gray off. And now we have a perfect triangle unit where all of our points our seams are going right to the points. That's what we want to have. All right, we'll trim up this other one, and then we'll be ready to put this block together. All right, it's time to sew this together. So for these 2 points, we've got 2 quarter square triangles that are 45-degree angles that are meeting here. So we're going to want to make sure that we pin that together well. The bottom part, there's nothing really to match here except to make sure that our corners are in line, so that's going to be pretty easy. So I'm just going to put one little pin up here, and then we're ready to sew that half of the block together. On the bottom, we kind of have the same deal happening where there's nothing really to match up here, but we do have 2 45-degree angles matching, so we're going to make sure those are pinned nicely together before we start sewing. So this is going to be really easy to see on here. It's really nice when you have 2 contrasting colors like this. So what I do is I flip this together, and then I lift it up, and I want to look at these seams. I want to make sure that they are coming down right on top of each other and that they're meeting really nicely. So that way we've got the seams meeting perfectly in the center. Then I'm going to stick a little pin in on the right side, just like that. And that'll be ready to pin together. Same deal with this bottom one. This one's going to be a little bit harder to see just because that seam is really dark, but that also means it's going to be harder to see if you make a little mistake and it's off a little bit. So that's good too. So now that I have these pinned, I'm going to use that just as a guide to take my first couple of stitches before I pull my pin out. I'm going to go ahead and move my sewing machine back to a regular 1/4 inch stitch. We don't need that scant 1/4 inch seam now that we're done sewing triangles. So I've got my sewing machine under the presser foot. My pin is still in there. I'm going to take a couple of stitches forward just to anchor that in place. So now if I pull this pin out, I'm not going to have to worry about those seams shifting at all. I'm going to be able to know that those are going to stay in the right spot. So I'm just lining my corners up. I'm putting my finger down to hold that in place, but you can pin it if you really want to. And we're just going to sew our 1/4 inch seam. Now we just have to repeat that for the other side. All right, we're ready to press, and then we're ready to get this block together once and for all. We're going to make sure that we are pressing these seams in opposite directions. That way it makes it really easy to pin that center seam together and you have perfect joints. I'm going to show you a fun trick for making sure all those points come together in exactly the right spot for your center. Alright, so we have a lot of points coming together here. We've got points from our flying geese. We have points from our 1/4 square triangles, which are converging at the right spot. So I want to make sure as best I can on the first try that these are going to come together. Here is a trick to do that. So you can see right here that where these seams are coming together. You can see that triangle of thread, and so I'm putting a pin just on the seam side of where that is. And then I'm going to stick my pin right on the seam side of where all these points come together in the back as well. All right, now I'm gonna hold this straight up and down, and that will keep all those points in place. And then I'm gonna take a second pin while I'm pinching that with my thumb and forefinger straight up and down. I'm putting that second pin in, and that's the one that's gonna hold these guys together and hopefully keep everything nice and tight where we want it. Now let's check and see where else we have to pin. This one, there are no seams to match, so we can just leave that free. You can pin that if you want to make sure that your corners are together. This one we do have some corners we want to pay attention to. So again, for that one I would raise it up and I would sort of peel one back to make sure that those seams are right on top of each other, and stick a pin in to hold it in place until I can get it to the sewing machine. So same deal, I'm going to take a couple of small stitches just to hold that in place. And now I can start sewing across. And now, just like when we were sewing our flying geese together, we've got a thread X here too. So I want to make sure that I am sewing just to the right of that thread X, right where we stuck that pin in, so that way I hopefully don't lose any points on this. All right, so I'm gonna line my back corners up here. I'm gonna finish stitching. And now we have a moment of truth. We have to see how we did. Okay, let's see. Well, we stitched just to the side on there, and it looks like it's just to the side on the other side as well. So let's open this up. Oh, nice, very nice. We have all of our points converging right at the center. We have both of our flying geese. We didn't cut anything off. And then this seam, even though it's hard to tell because it's so dark, it's also going straight to the center. That is a good join. I'm super excited about it. I don't always get them that perfect, especially not on camera, but I'm really excited about that, and that just shows how taking a little bit extra time to do that double pinning method will really make a big difference at how your blocks come together. Let's press this open and finish this block up. So for this one, since I have blue on both sides of this block and gray on the other side, I'm gonna go ahead and press so that the seam is underneath the blue. That way we reduce the amount of shadows we see in our final quilt. Just like every block in this quilt, I'm finishing it off with a little spritz of Mary Ellen's Best Press to help get that good and flat so that all those triangles are super flat and really easy to quilt when we get to that stage. So this is it, block 6 in the Dimensions block of the month. I love that we can get all this color variation from one strip of fabric. Just love these Kinkame shades. Love, love, love them. I hope you're loving them too. If you're following along at home and you don't have the kit and you want to get the kit, we're going to have them at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. We also have pattern books there. You may be able to get them at your local quilt shop. So you can check there as well, but you can always get them at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com from us. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you can get lots more quilting tips and tricks. We do a lot more than just show you how to make our patterns. We have dozens of quilting video tutorials teaching you how to do everything from sew an accurate 1/4 inch seam all the way to binding your quilt. So we take you through the whole process. We help you out there and help try to make you a better quilter. That's what we're all about. Well, thanks so much for following along, and happy quilting.